Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to get started with our second campus forum. And the goal here is to educate the campus on some of the recent legislation that has come through, and to also provide just a brief overview for those of you who are not familiar with the funding formula. I'd like to just thank everybody who's part of the panel, Michelle Grimes-Hillman, Dean of Academic Affairs, Elijah Sims, and Elijah, I'm not going to remember your title.
Trip coordinator.
Oh, I could have done that. And Dr. Mike Munoz, our Vice President of Student Services, and Janae Hund, President of the Faculty Association. And we're also going to be inviting a couple of faculty to join us in the AB 705 portion. Ladera Barbie, Department Head for Math, and it will either be someone from English, but they're in class, so we may rejuggle this a little bit, but if they don't show up, then Lee Douglas will speak for English. Okay, and ESL is here as well. Excellent, thank you. And my name is Kathy Scott, if you don't know me. I'm Vice President of Academic Affairs. Okay. Like I said, I think we're going to reorder this slightly and put, so that we can wait for the English faculty member. So we're going to start with the online college and Michelle Grimes-Hillman. Sorry, I just need to interrupt. Now you do, everyone, if there are handouts out back here, and there's fact sheets on every portion of the presentation. So if you want to go through it with the presenters, you can certainly do that, but it will be helpful to you. Thank you.
Okay, good. I was going to say good morning, but it's officially good afternoon. One of the things I want to preface the information about the California Online Community College, as they are now calling themselves, it was built into legislation, but it's built on a premise that there are 2.5 million adults between the ages of 25 and 34 that are considered stranded workers. And this is numbers that come out of the Chancellor's office, and these stranded workers have little or no college and are considered underemployed if they're employed at all. So this was the concept of creating the 115, as the Chancellor's office likes to call it, the 115th college, to serve these stranded workers who don't either have access or have some other inability to reach a brick and mortar institution. So Governor Brown wanted to create a legacy, so he introduced the college through legislation, through the trailer bill. And the language in the trailer bill describes that the Board of Governors will become the Board of Trustees. This is very unusual because, as you know, Board of Trustees are elected officials, and the Board of Governors, who are appointed by the governor to support the California system and make changes to Title V, of course, are appointed, not elected. So then, to further refine it, the Chancellor picked 7 people out of the Board of Governors to act as the executive committee for the online college, and they are the decision-making body. There is 1 faculty member on the Board of Governors who is also part of this executive committee, and she's from Cypress College. Her name is Jolena Grande, but she's the only faculty member on that executive committee. This also allowed the Chancellor became the official CEO for the 115th. That's very unusual as well. He was delegated authority to hire legal counsel. He was delegated authority to sign contracts up to $175,000. He was delegated hiring authority for a permanent CEO, and they're going through that hiring process now with the goal to have a permanent CEO for the 115th by January of 2019. In the language, in the legislation, it says that the college will be accredited within 3 years, and that the first set of courses will be offered in fall 2019, even though they will not have official accreditation, which is something that none of the other 114 colleges would be able to do. Their focus will be on CTE. The Chancellor's Office has repeatedly said that they will not compete with the other 114 colleges, although both, I think, the CEOs and the CIOs across the state are pretty skeptical about that. Their first 3 programs, because the legislation said they had to have 3 programs to start, will be IT support, medical coding, and first-line supervisors in multiple industries. One of the reasons that claim that the college will not, that this 115 will not compete with everybody else is it's going to be competency-based, open entry, open exit classes, which means students can come in, take some kind of module, and then exit. They don't even have to complete the course, and they are going to do something different with their credit hours, different than the rest of us can do, so it's still up in the air about what that's actually going to look like. They are also going to provide credit for prior learning, something that we do locally, credit by exam currently for some disciplines. But they're going to open it and make it more broad as it's based on the institution that this 115 will be based on is Arizona State University. Maybe you've seen their advertisements, and Governor's University, both online institutions. They are going to seek dual accreditation. They're going to get accredited by our regional accreditors, the ACCJC, as well as DEAC, which is Distance Education Accreditation Commission. Because when they open up next fall, the courses will not be financial aid eligible because they are not accredited. They have assured the other 114 colleges they will not be charging fees, again, something, or tuition, something that we can't just opt. So they get some perks that the rest of the colleges don't have. These are some key milestones that are expected from the online college. By July 1st of 2019, they must have a 7-year business plan. They must have demand-driven pathways. They need to develop an accreditation and outreach plan. They need to figure out how they're going to integrate credit for prior learning into the student onboarding. They need to define the duties for instructional support and initial student enrollment for fall 2019. Please note that there is no language here saying that they will be hiring full-time faculty, although they have assured us that they will. July 1, 2021, they're going to use the students' feedback to improve instruction and establish 3 new pathways and apply for accreditation. By 2023, they'll be enrolling students into these program pathways. They will design 10 more additional programs and pathways, and they have, I guess probably because of concerns raised by the other institutions in the system, they have said that for every 10 pathways, at least one of those pathways will be developed in collaboration with a traditional community college. What that pathway would look like, what, would colleges apply to be partners with the 115 is unknown. How they're going to select that is they just don't know. 2025, they'll continue to enroll students in their program pathways and then use student feedback, and hopefully by 2025, they will be officially accredited. It's a long time to wait for accreditation, and again, for the other 114, we would have to be accredited should we want to be offering new programs.
Okay, just to tell you about the format, I should have told you this first. We'd like to go through all of the different areas first, and then we'll take questions on any of the things that are being presented. That way, if someone has to leave, at least they will have the information about what the changes in the legislation are. Okay, the English faculty are in class, which is where English faculty should be, right? So we're going to go ahead, and Lee is going to speak for English, but we'll go backwards here a little bit. And we will start with Elijah, and then we'll be joined by Ladera and Lee for English. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elijah Sims. Again, I'm the matriculation coordinator and also a counselor at Long Beach City College. So I want to talk to you a little bit about AB 705 and just start with an acknowledgement that the assessment, which was the mechanism by which we place students into English and reading and math courses, is no longer being offered. The Chancellor's Office was going to sunset the assessment, is sunsetting the assessment as of January 1st, 2019, but LBCC has already took it upon ourselves to use other methods to place students. So I want to talk a little bit about why that is. And, students were being placed into remedial courses more than we might have expected by an equitable test, but the result of that was these students were also being stuck, were getting stuck in those remedial courses. So a part of what's happening now in the spirit of AB 705, and we'll talk more about what AB 705 is we're honoring the coursework that students have already completed, and we're removing an inequitable assessment and the placements that were associated with that, and we are allowing students to be placed in a different way, and we'll talk about how that is. And then the last why for AB 705 is just we have experienced a number of opportunities to embrace statewide innovative teaching practices, and we'll hear some of those today. So I'm the one who's up here speaking, but there are a number of folks who've been helping with the implementation of AB 705 who are represented in this space. So Ladera is here, and Lori Potter's here, Moises and Lee Douglas. So when the time comes, we'll have other folks who can speak to some of the things that we've been doing. So what is AB 705? AB 705 is a law, and that law intends to enable more students to successfully complete degrees and certificates and transfer. It also ensures that students are going to have access to college level coursework and can complete those classes within 1 year. AB 705 shifts the onus on the institution to place students in that college level coursework unless we're able to determine that those students would be more successful if we place them in a basic skills pathway. AB 705 was signed October 13th of 2017, and it requires that colleges use one or more of the following things in order to create a placement for students, and that is high school coursework. So another way of thinking of that is the high school transcript, high school GPA, and also high school grades. So we'll talk about what LBCC is using for our placements. If students are not able to obtain official transcripts, that's okay, because students can also self-report their high school information. And data has shown that the information that they report is highly reliable and is very much aligned with their transcripts. And if high school information is not available or the student's not able to recall what courses they completed, we also have a guided placement tool that generates a placement for students as well. So when it comes to placement, English and reading and math courses at LBCC are actually using all of the things that were mentioned on the previous slide. We're already using high school data. We're already using self-reported information that's collected during the application to the college on CCC Apply. And we already have the guided placement tool in place. And even on that guided placement tool is another opportunity for students to self-report their high school information. The English department has also created a co-requisite support course. So that is the traditional English 1 course with a support course that's aligned with it. And it's a seamless experience for students to get some additional support in that class. And we can have Lee speak more to that. That's going to be piloted in spring 2019. And English and reading are also collaborating to strengthen instructional practices, so we may see more innovative practices emerge from their collaboration. So math has placement or pathway-informed placement, and that is to ensure that once we have a student's goal identified, we're placing the student in the course that will help them to most efficiently reach that goal. For instance, a STEM student may need to take a course that's different from a student who's majoring in social sciences. In addition to that, math is also in the process of creating core requisite support courses, and those are in the curriculum process now. And we're expecting that at least some of those will be available for fall 2019 enrollment. And for the ESL department, ESL is already fully compliant with AB 705, but the ESL department is still looking for opportunities to streamline their sequence for students. Some notable collaborations, so LBCC, even before AB 705 existed, was already figuring out how to help students accelerate through the pathways more quickly, and had already created courses like English 105 AX, and we're already doing things like the Math Boot Camp. So as we travel throughout the region and see some of the best practices at some of these schools, it's always nice to see that because we had already started doing some of this work, more often than not, the other schools are sort of asking what it is that we're doing so they can repeat some of those same things. So student support services, collaborations, for instance, with math, where counseling is involved directly with math instructors and going to those classes in order to work with students. That's something that we've already been doing. Matriculation has already been working with English and reading and math to implement AB 705 and think through some of the changes. The Reading and Writing Center and embedded tutoring are already things that are happening for students, and we're constantly through this iterative process looking at data and using that to identify what additional opportunities there are to help to improve students' ability to get from I'm interested in going to college to I'm on my pathway to I have completed within 2 to 3 years. So with that said, I want to open up the space to some of those content experts who are here and some of our.
Let me go and then Nicole, because I don't know
Yeah.
English faculty, even though I was one. She's on the way.
Come on up.
Yeah, come on up.
Math has been doing some really cool things, so we figured it'd be good to share some of that here. And then Lori, if you want to.
Okay, so hi, Ladera Barbie, co-chair for math, but I pretty much know almost every single face here, of which you've probably already heard everything I'm having to say, but maybe you can drill me down and see what I'm missing. So kind of just elaborating on everything that Elijah really just told you, is that I look at AB 705 as having two components. One, where are we putting them? And two, what are we doing with them when we put them there? And so in terms of placement, he used the phrase, that we're using their, I was on the prior slide, but their high school coursework, GPA and stuff. But the biggest thing is that we're honoring the work they've already done. So the new placement is if the minimum requirement, again, I'm speaking to the choir here, but the minimum requirement to graduate high school is Algebra 1. So if you've graduated high school, you've passed Algebra 1, we will not put you back into Algebra 1. Our original goal was to actually have Math 110, our version of Algebra 1, completely phased out by next semester. But man, it had a huge demand. Now, we're not completely clear if the classes filled up quicker than other classes for Math 110 because people came here 3 years ago, took an assessment, and it burned into their head, take Math 110, and they didn't look that they've actually been placed higher. Or maybe they're feeling uncomfortable and they actually wanted it. So because of the demand, we're still offering some basic skills classes at or below where people left for their choice. We are not telling them to start there. But if there's a strong enough demand, we want to serve our population. So in terms of placement, like I just elaborated, that you will be placed where you're at, but there gets to be the second piece of what about these transfer level students? And there was the line about the ability to complete transfer work within 1 year unless the probability is low. So that's the piece we're still kind of working out some of the details on. And so in terms of curricular, we're making co-requisites. And, I can probably speak a little bit for what Nicole's done, but I'll let Lee probably could articulate it better. But I want to explain the co-requisite piece because I don't even think everybody within our department gets the co-requisite piece. So we're trying to assist these students. And actually, let me back up a step. pretty much everybody knows that the math classes have low success rates. And I mean, I know that Kathy hasn't given her whole piece yet, but she talks about state standard pass rates and this and that and areas that we're already below. So we clearly need to do something different. We can't keep doing the same. We can't just put a student at a higher level and do the same thing with them and say, oh, well, it's your job to pass, right? So we need to change what we're doing. So the co-requisite model says, you know what? You don't need to actually retake pre-algebra and algebra 1 and algebra 2 just so that you're ready for college algebra. You passed enough algebra in high school. We're saying you're ready, but you may not have everything you need. So we're still going to give you Math 45, college algebra, but there's an extra, you have your choice. Math 45 at 8 a.m. with Ladera, the regular 4-unit class, or Math 45 at 8 a.m. with Cindy, the 6-unit choice, which on your transcripts will have Math 45, a 4-unit class. Now you'll also have a separate class on your transcript, but Cindy's got that extra co-requisite piece. Where she's going to get to a topic and realize, you know what, students haven't done fractions by hand or on the calculator for 2 years, for 10 years. So let's actually just stop and carve out a few minutes and focus on making sure you're up to speed. Because this other class, the one that I'm teaching at 8 a.m. at the same time, I'm saying, you know what, you signed up for the one that says you're ready and you don't need that backup support. And if you need it, maybe we could have you transfer classes. I can refer you to the Success Center. I can see those students. But the theory is a group of students is going to want a little extra help. So let's allow that time in the class. But the other great thing about this co-requisite is it's not 2 extra hours a week for lecturing. It's a 2 extra hours a week. Is that still right? Yeah, to give them what they need, which could be fraction review, but it could be, I'm going to say study skills generically, but it could be, you know, how do you study for a math class? How do you handle this? You know, let's spend some time and in class, let's go over your test. Let's work in groups and see what you got wrong and how we could correct those problems. That's not something that's just being assigned outside of class as a suggestion. It's taking place with your group that you're learning with. So that's where we're at. We're placing students based on their high school work, and we're giving them the support they need. Is that good? I cover all my topics?
Hi, everybody. I'm Laurie Potter from ESL, and I've been working with this project for a long time because I was working on the Common Assessment Test. So for ESL, there's 2 portions, and one is the actual coursework that students need to complete the academic program within a certain amount of time. Now, ESL students get more time. With math and English, it's 1 year. With ESL, it's 3. So our courses will already fit the literal meaning of the law. But we're still looking at it. It's a very fluid situation because we're also looking at the new placement process, you know, doing away with AccuPlacer. How are students going to be placed into ESL? A second component also includes our international student program because the current, this new way of sort of looking at high school transcripts, they don't always match up with what we do in the US, right? So we have, you know, a number of other issues. Another issue that we have in ESL that we really want to address is bridging from our non-credit to the credit and making sure that once they finish the non-credit program, which is not included in AB 705. So for you counselors out there, if you have students in the non-credit program, that is not covered by this assembly bill. That's a separate program. But we want the students, once they finish the non-credit and they get their certificate, to move into the credit programs and get certificates and degrees in whatever, you know, field they want to. So this is all a part of just a very fluid process of looking at our courses academically, but also looking at the placement, looking at making sure we get students in the right place in the right program. So I think that about covers it. Okay.
And I also just want to call out reading. I don't know if we have anyone from reading here other than Jennifer Rodham, but reading went from like a 5-course sequence to a 2-course sequence, and they didn't do that because of AB 705. They did it because that's good for students. And a lot of that is what we've been seeing with all of the innovations. They didn't start because of AB 705. They already existed.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak briefly about the great work that the English department has done and is doing related to AB 705. You've already heard a couple of things similar to what the math department is doing. The English department has developed co-requisites. So they have a 2-unit co-requisite course, and they're piloting 12 sections in spring 2019 because we want to gather some data, see how well it works, and then see what needs to be improved for fall 2019. So the co-requisite model will be in place. They're also expanding the embedded tutoring because one thing that we did not want to have happen is push students up and inadvertently push them out because they weren't ready for that college level course. So we're putting embedded tutoring in all of the sections that we're offering for spring 2019, and then we'll be expanding that in the fall. So we're excited about that. Also, to provide support to students that may not necessarily be ready for the college level, they're retaining the 801A, so we're not getting rid of all of our levels that are below transfer level, but we're keeping 801A, so students won't be placed there, but if they need some additional support and counselors feel that the students feel like they could benefit from taking a class that is below transfer level, they can do that. And then lastly, the reading department and the English department are exploring integrated reading and writing. Jennifer Rodden's been very intimately involved in that. So it's not fully fleshed out yet, but that's another thing that we're talking about within the School of Language Arts and Communication, how we can meet the needs of those students, is by having an integrated reading and writing curriculum, courses, but that's down the road, but we want to kind of give you guys a preview of things to come. So if this was Nicole here, she'd have a lot more to tell you, but I want to give you the general information. All right, thank you.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Munoz. I'm the Vice President of Student Support Services, and I'm going to be providing a brief update on AB 19, the California College Promise. I think before we get started, I think it's important to kind of recognize and acknowledge the history of LBCC in the College Promise work. Much of what you'll find in this legislation, I think, is based upon the initial work of LBCC and the Long Beach College Promise. And so the first part of my conversation is going to be really focused on the statewide legislation and some of the changes and what's coming out of that legislation. And then I'll talk more specifically about how the statewide AB 19 California College Promise will intersect with our local LBCC College Promise. So first, AB 19 was authored by Miguel Santiago, who is an assembly member who represents pretty much downtown Los Angeles, northeast LA area. And when he authored the California College Promise, they identified some public policy focus goals and that were really rooted in increasing college attendance and graduation rates and reducing and eliminating achievement gaps. And so when we think of the spirit of the legislation and we think about the intent behind the legislation, we want to ask ourselves and make sure that all of our services and activities that we are kind of implementing through AB 19 are aligned with those two focus areas. So in order for a school district, or not school district, excuse me, in order for a community college district to be able to participate and receive AB 19 funding funds, we have to commit to 5 core program requirements. The first is an early commitment to college program. And so that is demonstrated, how LBCC is satisfying that requirement is that is demonstrated through some of our partnerships with LBUSD. As you may or may not know, we do the 4th grade college tours where we bring 4th graders on as part of the Long Beach College Promise. And so that's kind of our means of satisfying that requirement. The second requirement is partnerships to improve college readiness. And so this is, again, working with a local LEA, a local educational agency. In our case, that would be Long Beach Unified, to provide dual enrollment or ECCP supports. So we have Lizette here in the audience, and so a lot of the work that she's doing in collaboration with Dr. Scott around dual enrollment is what allows us to satisfy that second requirement. The third requirement is around assessment and placement practices, and that's really the implementation of AB 705. And as you just heard from Elijah and everyone else, that we are actually ahead of implementation, right? That deadline is that we have to be fully implemented by fall 19, and we're pretty much already implemented as of spring 18. So that's kudos to us, so we satisfy that third requirement. The fourth requirement is participation in the California Community Colleges Guided Pathways Program, which again, if you do not know, we are one of the 20 California guided pathways that are participating in institutes that's led by Kenna, and so we satisfy that requirement. And the last requirement is to maximize access to need-based financial aid programs, and that's defined by us participating in the federal student loan program, which our college satisfies, as well as ensuring that all students who receive the AB 19 funds have applied for either a FAFSA or a California DREAM Act, again, so making sure that students are not leaving revenue or leaving financial aid on the table. So now let's transition a little bit to how we're implementing AB 19 here at Long Beach City College. So first I'd like to share our allocation in red. So our 2018 allocation was $848,824. So that's a substantial amount of funding for our first year. And so let's talk a little bit about the student program requirements. In order for a student to be eligible to receive AB 19 funding, the student must be first-time, full-time in college, and have applied for a FAFSA or a California DREAM Act. So just to be clear, when I say first-time, full-time in college, that doesn't necessarily mean exclusively direct high school matriculants. In theory, you could have been out of high school for 20 years and come to college and still be first-time, full-time. So this legislation doesn't exclude or is not necessarily directly for high school matriculants, but many schools are leveraging those dollars in that way. So as we received our resources, and I'm not sure how much you've kept up in kind of the College Promise AB 19 universe, but a lot of community colleges are rapidly developing these college promises with the AB 19 funds. Case in point, and I'm like, and please don't throw anything at me when I share this with you. My previous institution, Rio Hondo, which is just right up the 605 North, decided to give 2 years promise for any student in California. They didn't have any locality requirements, or you had to be from Whittier, El Monte, or Pico Rivera. It was come one, come all. And they actually emailed all the students from LBUSD and let them know that you can come to Rio Hondo for 2 years for free before we've even announced our 2-year promise. And so a counselor from LBUSD called me, or actually communicated through someone who then I got in contact with and had lunch with her, and she says, you guys got to get with a program, because all the other schools, now that there's portability with your promise, where you were the only show in town for a decade and everyone's outpacing us. And so that was a pretty hard message to hear, but we took it. It was Sonia, myself, and Elijah at lunch, and we kind of received that and came back. And so we have 2 phases for implementation. Phase 1 is for this school year, because to be able to put in place a 2-year funded promise and some of those things, we have to work with our foundation's Board of Governors. And so we weren't at a point where we could do something this year, such as a 2-year funded promise. So what we went ahead and did is we leveraged these resources to provide textbook assistance and bus pass assistance to eligible students. So we identified a query, worked with institutional effectiveness, got a roster of students who were eligible, and then we put them in 4 batches. And the students with the greatest need were notified first, and they had 72 hours to apply for these funds. Then the second batch of students went forward after that 72 hours, and they were allowed to apply. And it went into 4 batches till all students, regardless of financial need, had an opportunity to apply. The distinction was we did it through an equity-minded lens that allowed the students with the greatest need a little bit more opportunity to apply for those funds, since there's a limited amount of funds that could be applied for. And I'm proud to say, and I really want to acknowledge Dean Corral, because he really stepped in, and I can come up with a great idea, but he executed it, and he was able to work with the bookstore, get vouchers in place, work with transportation, and so we've dispersed all the eligible funds for fall semester, and we have another batch, for disbursement for spring. Now, looking forward to 2019-20, we have worked with, under Dr. O'Malley's leadership, we've been able to work successfully with our LBCC Foundation and secured a 2-year promise. So now we're competitive again with a lot of the other local schools. So we'll be offering a 2-year college promise where AB 19 funds will cover year 1, and the LBCC Foundation will cover year 2 of the scholarship. And this is really important, I think, when we think of the guided pathways model and really trying to get students to complete 30 units in their first year, maybe not 15 and 15 each semester, but through a combination of summer and intercession, really trying to have that focus of getting students through 30 units. This is going to be really pivotal for us. Also, just to kind of give some context, of the $848,000, we project that probably only half of that will be spent in year one scholarships for the Long Beach College Promise. So with the remaining funds, we will direct those funds towards Promise Pathway students who are currently not eligible. So they're right outside of our LBUSD partnership, or St. Joseph's, I believe is the name of school, and Bellflower are the two schools outside of LBUSD that are part of the scholarship. So we're going to be able to expand at least a first-year scholarship to some of our local area schools to entice them to come. Because keep in mind, schools like Rio Hondo and other schools are promising them scholarship. They're not bounding themselves to an attendance boundary. So we want to maintain the legacy of the College Promise and really provide those Cadillac services and the 2-year scholarship for our local students, but broadening the net slightly and bringing in other schools for at least a 1-year scholarship. And so that's my presentation.
All righty. Janae Hunt, Faculty Association President. I get to talk about the money. So save something for the last. But I do want to say thank you to Kathy Scott for organizing the panel. Yes, thank you. In our first Rep Council discussion of the year, we had a lot of discussion about the impacts of AB 705 and whatnot, and we thought it would be a good idea at least to give people an opportunity to be informed and ask questions and share insights. So thank you, Kathy. So I'm talking to you about the student-centered, as it is called, the student-centered funding formula. And for those of us who've been around for a long time, we know that this is very much changing how we get funded to run as an institution. So historically, we were funded based purely on our enrollment. That would be the base allocation, which is still the biggest chunk of how we're being funded. That's being funded on our FTS, our full-time equivalent student enrollment. And that will be 60% of our funding, and it's going to be based on a 3-year rolling average, not based on each year enrollment, but the average over 3 years. And it will still allow for the summer shift borrowing. What's new about the funding formula are the next two: the supplemental allocation, which gives monies for our low-income student population, and then that's going to be 20% of our funding. And then the last is the student success allocation, what some are calling the performance-based funding, part of the formula. So that's also going to be 20%, which really has to do with our completion of degrees and certificates, transfers, and wage earning with premiums for outcomes of low-income students. So again, this slide is just showing us the 3-year transition. It's going to this year, the next year, and then through 2021 with full implementation of the changing funding formula by 2021-22 academic year. So just again, our year this year is, the base for this year is 70-20-10. Next year it'll be 65-20-15. And by 2020-21, it'll be the 60-20-20 that I was talking about. So we are in hold harmless mode, and that's a provision that guarantees the funding in the amount that we received in 2017-18. And that's going to be held harmless for the 3-year transition period into the 60-20-20 percentage. So we're going to be held harmless for our large college status, which we're now over 20,000 FTS, but and there might be a change in that, but I believe we're still being held harmless for the full 3 years, and that could obviously change by 21-22. So this breakdown just helps us understand our funding per student, and it helps us recognize that this is a weighted formula for the student success portion, and the greatest weight is being attached to the completion of ADTs, our associate degrees for transfer. So per student, the college receives $1,760, and if that student is a Pell Grant student, the college gets an additional $666. And if they are a Promise student, the college receives an additional $444, which, okay, so that kind of student, if it's everything, the college is receiving $2,870. So everything else is kind of weighted down from there. The associate's degree, I think, is weighted a little lower. And so the certificates, the CTE program, completion of 9 units or higher. Students transferring, we get, that's another success measure. We heard about AB 705, so students that are completing those college-level math and English classes, we see a different funding mechanism. And then the regional wage, which somebody else could speak probably to that better than I can. Let's see, so again, this slide is just telling us about that other supplemental allocation, which is really weighted based on our low-income student population, and that would be, again, students who are receiving the Pell Grant, our AB 540 students, and our Promise students. Thank you.
Okay, in the last year of the VPAA planning, we came up with some metrics which are shown here, and I think they were reasonable at the time, but we did these before the funding formula and before we realized what was going to happen to us. So we need to kind of look at them again. This morning in President's Cabinet, we got a copy of what is called the Student-Centered Funding Formula White Paper. And it will become public shortly, but in this document, it shows us what would happen if we did nothing over the next 3 years as we are going towards the end of the hold harmless period. And by doing nothing, I mean not increase our completions and not increase our number of Pell students. And what it's showing us is that in 21-22, we would have about a $2.3 million hit. So we know that if we do nothing. And then we are in a state of declining FTES right now. We have declining high school enrollment, and so we're struggling a little bit with enrollment. But if we fall below the 20,000 FTES, we would lose our large college status, which would be about another $1.3 million. And then in 21-22, we also lose COLA. So if you add all those things together, we're looking at about a $5 million hit when the hold harmless is over. So I'm telling you this because I need people to understand that we all have a role in what's happening with the funding formula. I went through these and I did the math on them. You know, if we increased by this amount, what would it mean for us? And it would mean about $250,000. And so you can see that that isn't going to be nearly enough. We have to really think very differently. I do want to congratulate the curriculum committee for approving the IGETC and the CSUGE certificates. Because if we had awarded those last year, we would have had 923 more completions, which would have brought in well over $1 million. So that one change alone would knock out over $1 million of that $5 million. I know that we've been talking about doing the interdisciplinary degrees. Some of the local competition have those degrees, and we really need them. I know we used to have them back in the day, and we need to bring them back. So I've been talking to members of the curriculum committee, Michelle, about what we can do to provide the leadership for that to happen. But it does require that the faculty work together and work collaboratively. So those are the numbers as you see them. And I think they were actually a bit low. I was trying to be careful and not make it so high that we couldn't reach it. But I think for associate degree for transfer, we're going to do far more than the 10%. We were talking about that this morning. So, you know, it will be higher than the $250,000, but we do have work to do. And so in the VPAA major priorities last year, we talked about enrollment management. We need to be scheduling for the benefit of students. That is critically important because when we don't, it means that students don't take as many units. And we need to make our schedule as easy for them And also, we need to look at our curriculum and our completions during the department planning process. If the completions are low, as you're looking at your Tableau data, why are they low? What needs to be done? Are there too many units in those certificates? Are they not industry certified? What needs to happen? So when you look at that data, it's not just a matter of looking at it and saying, oh, there it is. We really, really need to be looking at what can be done to increase it. AB 705, critical. It has to be done within the first year, and the efforts of math and English, I mean, I just applaud you because you're all being so creative and really throwing everything out in terms of, and yours is the toughest. I know ESL's got a part in this, reading has a part in this, but for English and math, that's a tough, tough thing. But you're being really creative and being leaders, and I just am very thankful. Guided pathways, that has to happen. You know, if we do have our guided pathways in place, our students won't be taking however many units they don't need. And they'll be able to get through, and we won't have what we have where 1 in 5 students gets a degree or gets what they want to accomplish here. We need professional development surrounding equity. We've been talking a lot about individual course success data. As a college, our individual course success data, which is C or better, is about 10 points below the state average. We need to raise that because when it's low, that means that students are not completing, obviously. They're not completing their class, they're feeling badly about themselves, they may not sign up for the next semester. It's got a negative impact. When students do poorly, it just continues. And so we need to do what we can to help our students, whether it's a welcoming syllabi, welcoming practices. Janae talked on College Day about what she did, and without changing any of her content, and just changing the way that she interacts with students, her success rate increased dramatically in her courses. And she was very self-reflective about that. And I know that a lot of people are getting their data. I'm going to encourage the department heads on Thursday to really reach out and get the data and share it and talk to their faculty about it. But that really needs to happen. And we need to have it disaggregated, which students are not being successful. We need to know that and be aware of it. And none of this can happen without governance, without inclusion and the collaboration of everybody. And that's why I'm really happy that today, and this was Janae's idea, I appreciate her giving me credit, but it was her idea, and it came from a lot of the faculty being confused and concerned about what's been happening with all this legislation that is hitting us so fast. You know, how do we react to it? What does it mean for us? What do I, as an individual, do? And we got asked a question yesterday, you know, what can we do? And you know, that may come up in the questions here, and we can certainly answer that, but these are some of the things that I've just told you that we can do. And individually in your own class, whether you're a staff member working with students, anything we can do to help our students feel more welcome, help them make it through. We know that they struggle, and it's our job to help them. Okay, I think that's it for me at this point, and thank you very much.
Okay, well, hello everyone again. So when I was on board, so you may or may not know, I started July 2nd, so I've been in the role for about 4 months. And when I was onboarded, I was asked to really look at last year's plan that was produced from the planning process and kind of dust that off and help identify some priorities that were really going to be priorities that were going to help us in our funding formula and grow some of our outcomes. And so we have, I formed a Student Services Leadership Council, and we met over the summer through a retreat, and we identified some priorities. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those priorities and then drill down specifically on one priority that I think can have a significant impact on our funding formula. So the first priority we're looking at is increasing the enrollment of direct high school matriculants by 5%. That one's not only tied, that particular priority is not only tied to the funding formula, but really helping us maintain or achieve our large college status. We know that our direct high school matriculants have choices, especially what I shared with you with AB 19 and the portability of the College Promise now. We need to do a very good job of making sure that we look at these matriculation steps and strengthen our onboarding processes. Also, we know that direct high school matriculants tend to enroll in the largest number of units. Direct high school matriculants right now, their average number of units attempted in their first term is slightly under 12. It's like 11.8. When you compare that number to other populations on campus, usually it's much lower than that. So it's a good way to kind of pick up enrollment. And so we're going to be focusing on those students. Also, priority number 2, we're looking at increasing the average number of direct high school matriculants units attempted in their first year by 3%. So the idea is that although 11.8 is kind of high, we want it to be higher. We know that we want it to be close to 15. I know there's a lot of debate around that, and so we're not necessarily looking at 15 units per term, but really the idea of 30 units in the first year. So a combination of summer, winter intersession, fall term, spring term, and the subsequent summer to really shore up so that when a student starts their sophomore year, guess what? They have sophomore standing, right? And so that's going to be important. So we're going to be looking at that as well. The third priority is increasing the number of Pell Awards by 20%. And I'm going to go into that priority in a moment in more detail. Priority 4 is aligning our priority number 4 with Dr. Scott's priority from her planning process from the previous year regarding the associate degrees for transfer by 6%, an increase, I should say, by 6%, and then a special focus and attention on our Pell and Promise students by 10%. And then lastly, I know this particular priority is not necessarily tied to the funding formula or our large college status, but we felt it was important to include given some of the things that we've been seeing on the campus in the last year or so, and that is increasing the number of mental health counseling appointments by 18%. And I'm proud to say that we'll be bringing in, we just hired a new part-time clinician to help expand the number of appointments that we're offering in the Health and Wellness Center. So let's just drill down a little deeper and show you what could happen should we achieve one of these priorities. But more specifically, before I get into this, there's a point I want to make. When I spent some time looking and reviewing the funding formula and analyzing it, 2 things struck me from that table that Janae showed. One is there's 2 variables that probably really drive whether or not a school has the potential to do very well in this funding formula. One variable is size, and the other variable is the number of your share of low-income students. And guess what? We have both. So really, we have all the variables we need to do very well in this funding formula. We're not Citrus College. We're not 12,000 students, right? We're LBCC, which pushes close to 30,000 students. And so there's a sizable student demographic here. That's 60% of the funding formula. And that other 40%, a large part of it, as you saw, is driven by the number of low-income students. So that tells me we know we have them here. We just haven't done a very good job of documenting them and getting them fully packaged with financial aid. And so if we really focus in on some of these areas, I think you're gonna see that really quickly we can turn this around. So when we look at the Pell totals, the first table you'll see is based on the Chancellor's Office simulations of what we've currently reported. So we currently, for the Chancellor's Office simulations, have 9,575 students who have Pell Grants. Another 1,330 students are receiving AB 540, and about 21,094 students are receiving Promise Grants. I want to draw your eye to the Promise Grant number at 21,000, and then I want to draw your eye to the Pell total around 9,000. I'm not saying that every Promise Grant student, and I should clarify, Promise Grant is now, it's now called the Promise Grant. It used to be called the BOG. So you guys remember the Board of Governors fee waiver? That's what we're talking about, okay? So when you think about the Board of Governors fee waiver at 21,000 students, and then you look at Pell students being only 9,575, there should be parity between those numbers. Because typically if you're BOG eligible, you're more likely than not Pell eligible. So the fact that those 2 numbers are so disparate tells me as a VP that there's a lot of work to be done there, because we can really drill down and close that gap. So if you look at the next table, should we increase our Pell Awards by 20%? Just Pell Awards. And we focus on that, and we go from 9,575 to 11,490. That difference will result in an additional $1.7 million in funding. I'll say that again. $1.7 million in funding by just increasing Pell Awards by 20%. And it sounds ambitious, but I'm telling you it is. It's a systems issue. It's totally attainable. This is just us thinking differently and acting differently, like Dr. Scott kind of mentioned, right? And so we have all the variables that are needed to do well in this funding formula. We just have to shift the way we think about how we do things. And so I just wanted to, like I said, give you a real example of what this could look like. And keep in mind this additional revenue that we just showed, that's only for documenting Pell. That doesn't count that when they complete and they do all these other tasks that you get additional funding for them too. Remember how the table, if you looked at that previous table, that if you were a Pell student, you got an extra 660, I hate that number, 666, right? An extra $666 for an ADT, so that's not even accounting for that. So again, just keeping in mind, this is where we're headed and some of the priorities that we're focusing on.
Okay, I know that was a lot of information, and you were really a good audience. You're taking notes, it was great. But I hope you can see that even though the times are challenging and they're changing very quickly, we can do this. If you look at just the IGETC and the CSU certs, the change in Pell, that alone is going to bring us a long way. So we can do this, and we've got time to do it, absolutely. But this is a time for you, and we would love to hear anything that you have to say, whether it's, and I don't know, Nicole, you're here now. Would you like, Nicole's here. Would you like to say a couple things about English? I mean, Lee did his best. He's not English faculty, but he did a really good job. But if there's anything you want to add about what English is doing, I'd certainly like to give you that opportunity. You should come up here because it's being taped. And we are taping this so our colleagues who couldn't make it today can view it.
I'm not sure what you mentioned, Lee.
Yeah, Nicole, we'd like to hear how you're being creative.
I think it's on now. Hey.
Can you hear me now? Okay, yes. Let's see. For English being creative, we completely redesigned our curriculum, which started in 105AX and is just extending to the CoRec English 1 that starts in spring. So that means obviously more time in the class with the students, slowing down the process, a lot of scaffolding, a lot of professional development that's ongoing. So we meet as faculty to discuss sort of what's tripping us up and how we can attend to the students. We have embedded tutors at this point, which are fabulous, just amazing. They're really good bridges to helping our students in the class. And so creatively, we really have sort of unpacked what we do and why we do it, and we're much more intentional about our goals and the students' goals. I don't know what else I could say about the supports that we have are Starfish, embedded tutors. Elijah came and spoke. I'm going to have financial aid come in. We're doing the registration in December. So you have a lot more time and space to just discuss some of those other supports and resources for students beyond just the academic stuff that we do in the class. I'm trying to think anything else they didn't mention. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, no. I think creatively as well in terms of the CoRec curriculum, I think faculty are also approaching their students in a different way. Our mantra lately has been meet them where they are. And so I think the biggest shift has been the way in which we see our students and approaching them with not so much the SLO mind, although that's obviously part of our job, but seeing them as individuals in the classroom. So we do a lot more individualized work one-on-one or remediating in groups. So I think for us, teaching these classes is much more about multitasking, which is a little bit daunting for us because we just like to kind of get through the material, but it's more customized to the students and meeting the needs of the students where they are. So some students are maybe just still at that novice level, and we're attending to them, and then the ones that really thrive, we're giving them more challenges. So it takes a little bit of time and space in class to deal with that, but the results are really fabulous because they're learning from each other. We're using the students as experts to teach the other students. So the classes are noisier. We're running around a lot. The chairs are moving around. It's all collaborative. It's not the typical way that we used to teach anymore. It's really just, you walk by and it looks really messy, but it's actually really fabulous, and the results are really great too. So I think that's another creative spin that we've done, just relying on each other and just attending to the students that really need the help. So if we remediate, and we notice that maybe 5 or 6 students are really struggling, we might dismiss the ones that get the work done, and we'll keep the others and work with them one-on-one. So it's using the time in more flexible ways. That's also creative. Hope that helps. Yeah.
Thank you. And I also meant to say that the legislation, even though it is coming at us very quickly, all of it is designed to make us better as a system. We're not completing students as a system. And so all of it, we have a moral obligation to do this work. We absolutely do, particularly when you look at, the students that go into remedial math. 2% are ever going to get out and make it through college level if they start 4 levels below. They will not make it through. And so I admire the math, the English, ESL, and reading faculty because they've really got together. They're meeting weekly. They're talking all the time. And it's just making such a huge difference. Okay, so at this point, we're opening it up for comments, and we can maybe have someone help with the mics. But we'd like to hear from you, and yes, we'll get a mic over to, well, this room isn't like T1200 where you have to have a mic for everything, but we do have to have you on mic because we're taping you. Thank you.
Hi, Mike. This one is directed to you. How is it that Rio Hondo is able to afford such a wide net of portability?
I have a loud voice.
It's on now.
Okay. Honestly, I have no idea. I think they overpromised. Oh, wait, this is being taped, huh? Just kidding. Strike that from the record room. Well, I think that it's ambitious, yes, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think they are counting on that the vast majority of students qualify for the BOG fee waiver. And so when they look at that dollar amount that they're on the hook for, they're betting that they will be able to offset that with all the other revenue. I was in the conversations in the initial stages when there was discussions about that strategy. You also have to think about from an FTS standpoint, if you're gonna get the college promise, you have to be enrolled in what? Full time. So the FTS that you're gonna gain in terms of that capturing that full-time student as opposed to trying to piece 3 or 4 students together to get 1 FTE, they're counting on that revenue being higher to offset whatever may have to be given out as a promise grant or scholarship, if that makes sense. That's the gamble I think they're taking.
Thank you. We also have a number of experts in the room. Paul Creason's here, Moises is here. So if you have questions about math, Lee's here, and we can certainly help.
I wanted. I had asked you before about the classes that we're no longer offering and how do students improve grades. For example, 805, Math 805, Math 815, English 801B, Reading 880, 881, 882, 883. So if a student didn't do well in those classes, they're no longer going to have the opportunity to improve those grades, and that can affect their financial aid if they don't have a good GPA or a good completion ratio.
So it is a very, I'm not going to pretend I have the only perspective. I think I'll just offer a partial perspective to some of that, and then I'm sure there's going to be other ways of looking at the problem. I think the first one is, let's take it from a financial aid or a satisfactory academic standard. We have an appeals process. I know it's cumbersome, but the idea is, to me, if a student's GPA is being impacted by the inability to make up a course, repeat a course to improve their GPA, and you see other markers that show an improvement in their GPA, but it's those specific courses that we're no longer offering that's holding them back from meeting satisfactory academic progress, then that to me sounds like the perfect candidate of a student to be approved for an appeals. So I think it's looking at our sorry, it keeps going in and out. The other thing is there's academic renewal, right? We may have to focus more on academic renewal. It's not necessarily course repetition, but whatever our academic renewal processes are, we may want to look at those. And then thirdly, if the Senate wants to take action, or I'm not sure if they have a living curriculum or Senate, but maybe some specific guidelines took a course that's higher in the sequence and did well in it, maybe there can be some the Senate can weigh in on whether that class can be used to replace. You know, I mean, there's different things that can be explored, but some things can be explored, I think is what you're raising. So whether it's a combination of using our appeals process through staff to make sure that those students are punished inadvertently, two, looking at our academic renewal processes. That's a little different than course repetition, to see if that picks up some more of those students. And then thirdly, I would say having the Senate just really actually weigh in on what do you do with those students. Because I could see that if the Senate passes certain, or adopts certain processes that addresses those specific courses, they could probably come up with a solution that might work and still achieve what we want to achieve. Just a thought.
I have a second question, kind of related to that, I think, in terms of grades, but I think when you look at the numbers of Pell versus Promise Pathways, does the Promise Pathways, it doesn't require that they have a certain GPA or a certain completion ratio?
Sure, yes. So, so it wasn't Promise Pathways, it was a Promise grant that was, I feel like it's like Prince, like formerly known as BOG. Like,
Sorry, Prince, I got distracted.
So from that standpoint, it's the BOG students and the Pell students that we're looking at. And BOG still has standards. With BOG, you have academic progress and progress standards that are similar to SAT. So, and actually, federal Pell standards are actually slightly more rigorous than the BOG. So you could be BOG eligible but not Pell eligible. So that's why I said there is going to be some discrepancies between those two numbers, but not what we currently have.
Yes.
I also want to answer the question about the students' success in maybe the courses that being placed into like transfer level. There's a lot of data that says they're fine, they're doing well in these courses. And so even DSPS students and EOPS students. And so this sort of conception like, oh, don't put them there, they're not going to succeed, they're actually doing fine. Even our equity rates have been closed because of AX. And so even if they have to repeat one more time, let's say they don't make it through the first time, they still would have done better had they done that versus starting at like an 801 level. So we trust that the students have the capacity to do the work and they have the support to do it. And there's evidence now that shows that these students are actually doing really well across the state.
Yeah, and I was just saying is that they don't have the opportunity to do it, so it's going to affect their GPA.
Yeah,
Not
right.
that they shouldn't. I'm
Right,
just saying
right.
that they're not going to have that opportunity.
Yeah, no more.
That was the question.
And Sophia, I've been looking into the issue of the grades, and I remember talking to Jennifer Rodden, although I don't want you to put you on the spot right now, but I remember talking to you about this. We will look at it systemically, but if there's an individual student in that situation, please let us know, and we can perhaps work with that individual student to get that grade removed or replaced by a class that's a higher level. Okay, thank you. All right, questions? Comments?
I have a question. This is, I guess, for you, Kathy, because you list this as your one of your priorities, and it kind of speaks in a different way to evidence that I know within my department in social sciences, there's been a lot of questions raised about what kind of professional development are we going to get to help us improve our success rates in the courses. And I've heard some of my colleagues talk about they need to have evidence-based practices that are proven to have an impact. And so I see this listed as one of your priorities, professional development. And I know Jorge made the call out on College Day to for us all to do what we can to encourage student success. But I think that there is a bit of a gap between taking a look at your data and trying to really understand what you can do as a classroom faculty. So really I'm wondering what the college is doing for that professional development. I've heard something about Flex Day in the spring is going to speak to that, and my colleagues in my department said, yeah, and that's next spring. That will be after we have completed the fall semester. So I think that there's a real need address professional development at the department level?
Okay, I know that a lot of departments have been requesting their individual course success data. I did get a list this morning from IE, and I'm going to talk to the department heads about it on Thursday. Getting that data and looking at and having each person look at their own data and then coming together as a department and discussing it, that has a lot of value. So nothing is stopping anybody from doing that now. And I know that the math and English people who've been having weekly discussions in their areas have come up with a lot of strategies for their own professional development and learning from each other. So that can certainly happen now. In regards to the Flex Day, I have been talking to the Academic Senate in preliminary discussions about using that individual course success data to provide workshops to further enhance what people can do in the classroom, having to do with equity strategies, engagement strategies, everything from the welcoming syllabi to, Cindy Enrique was here yesterday talking about group tests. What are the creative things we can do with that data? And we were looking at using some of our own faculty as presenters because we have a lot of expertise on this campus, and I think that would be a great idea, and perhaps continuing these workshops throughout the year. And we'd also been talking preliminarily, and I can let the Senate speak. I don't want to stomp on the Senate's toes. I get that professional development is a 10+1 item, and here it's relied primarily upon the Senate. But we are thinking possibly of having like an academy where people took a series of courses that could be categorized, and you take one, just like you do with Plan A or Plan B or Plan C. You take 2 courses in this section, not courses, but workshops here, 2 in here, and you would come out in the end with some type of a certificate that would be very nice. We are in the preliminary discussions of that, and I would certainly welcome the faculty to work on that with the Senate, as it is a 10+1 item. And I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to it, but that would be a start, and doesn't mean that there aren't other things that we can do.
So I'm going to speak out or do a call out to, I guess, our senators, and I know our faculty professional development, and I think I'm not sure if we have a committee, a faculty professional development committee any longer, but I think it would be awesome to see something like that, traveling expertise amongst our faculty here to reach out to our different departments. So I really look forward to Senate working on this and FPD, making sure that we have that ongoing training, and I don't hear my department complaining. Thank you.
Questions? Comments? Diana? Wait, we need to get over the mic. Sorry. Down the one, apparently.
I have a question. When we were talking about the allocation for the AB 19 funding this year, and it was 800,000. Sounds like a long time, but it's not really. But 800,000, et cetera. For the phase 1 with the textbooks and bus passes, I'm just kind of curious, what was that amount, approximately for that phase 1?
Sure. So the entire allocation was subdivided into 2 buckets, one for the textbook assistance and the other for transportation. If you want, I could dig through my phone and find the exact dollar amount, but basically what we did is we divided it into 2 terms, fall and spring, and we prepaid for a batch of bus passes. Do you remember the exact amount? Our number of buses we bought, Noel?
It was 500 bus passes for the fall term.
Okay.
That we covered. The rest was going on
Textbooks. So we bought 500 bus passes, and we dispersed them through the cashier's office. The way students accessed either bus pass or textbook assistance is there was an email that was sent to students, and they had to fill out a form basically saying they want to access these funds. And then as soon as they filled out the form, from the bookstore, we provided them with a roster, and they were able to go to the bookstore, and the bookstore invoiced us. So there was no cash transactions going to the students. It was if you basically said you wanted to receive the funds, and it was a first come, first serve, you went to the bookstore, your name was on a roster, and you had, what was it, $250?
250 credits.
So you had a $250 line of credit at the bookstore for fall, and then you'll get a $250 line of credit at the bookstore for spring. And then if you wanted the bus pass, you went to the cashier's office and you were able to, your name was on a roster, and then you were able to get a bus pass. And then we did give out all the bus passes. I was surprised how quickly the funds went. I thought they were gonna, I thought we were gonna go maybe even have a little leftover for spring, because we notify students kind of late because we were scrambling to put this together, and they went really quickly. I mean, I was very, it just really, I think it really just communicates and demonstrates the need.
But I mean, so was it like 300,000? That's what I'm asking, about how much was that total phase one cost?
So we'll need to consolidate all the expenses from bookstore, but there are 2,100 students that were eligible for the funds that were communicated to.
There was 2,100 students that were first-time, full-time, and had completed the FAFSA or California Dream Act that were notified. They all completed, those interested in the funds completed the survey to receive their their bus pass or textbook. Of those, not all students went to the bookstore to claim their vouchers, so we need to see how many actually were spent down, so that we can also provide possibly in the winter and then carrying over to the spring.
And just to be clear, I can give you, I actually have an email from accounting that has the breakdown. I just need to pull it up on my phone, so I can.
I was just curious the percentage of that.
So about, so to project of the 848,000, half of it went to fall, half of it is slated for spring. So when we looked at what we could allocate, the $250, so let's say 500, I'll just pull it up on my phone, so I'm not giving you. Oh, are you guys waiting for me? It might take me a few minutes. I'll get it to you in about like 5 minutes, but anyway.
Mike, I have a question about completion. We were talking about this at our last counseling meeting. So we're always like wanting students to complete, but then sometimes when they complete, then that goes against continuing to receive financial aid. So I don't know what kind of discussion, what kind of information you can provide us. And I'm just going to give an example for people that are not familiar with like the stuff that happens. So like a student, for example, pursuing nursing. So they take so many sciences and they take all their general education, and they might get into the nursing program eventually, but then they may see a counselor and, oh, you can get the associate's degree in biological sciences, which is great, that's completion. But then in terms of financial aid, it would go against them because they've actually completed something. So what can we do so that that doesn't happen to a student? And then now you have the certificates for the IGETC and Plan B for the CSU. So again, how is that going to negatively affect the students?
Sure. So just so that we're clear and everyone has a common understanding, it's not the major, that's the issue that becomes an implication for financial aid. It's the educational goal. So if a student selects an educational goal and they reach their educational goal, that's when financial aid becomes problematic. So what we need to do is internally, we need to build systems that runs a query and looks at students who are in educational goals that are limiting their potential to maximize their financial aid. So I'll give you a case in point. If I select an ed goal like a certificate of achievement, and really this just comes down to a database issue. And then, but I decide as I move along that I want to transfer. When I reach that certificate, even though my ed goal has changed because it hasn't been updated in the system, it will say, no more financial aid for you, you reached your ed goal. So what's important is for us to be able to identify what are the ed goals that students are in that limit their financial aid, and letting them know that if you remain in this ed goal, you might limit the amount of money you're able to get. The simple solution is telling them, pick this ed goal and you've just given yourself 90 units of financial aid, as opposed to 24 units of financial aid if you have this ed goal. So it goes back down to the ed goal. And so that is something that I think we as an institution are going to have to figure out and solve, but it's not unsolvable. It's a ed goal issue in order for financial aid.
And let me just add that students don't come here and say, I want to get an IGETC certificate. They have no idea what that is. So they never claim that as a goal. So we're pretty sure that we can auto-award those and we're not going to stop anyone's financial aid.
So I just wanted to also acknowledge that the application for awards and degrees went online this term. And as a part of it going online, one of the questions now is, do you plan on continuing to take courses at OBCC? So we are making steps toward students being able to have their financial aid, and that application being online is an initial step toward that. It used to be the case that you had to turn it in via paper, and once you turned it in, all signs pointed toward, now I'm done.
Can I expand on that? Yeah. So I think this has huge counseling implications, because in theory, and I don't know enough about our counseling context if this is something that you all do as counselors, but through SSSP and all the requirements, counselors should be updating students' educational goals every time they meet with them. So if that's not something that we have as a system, so I know at my previous institution, it was something that a counselor had to mark off in banner. Every time they met with a student, they either acknowledged it's the continuation of the same ed goal or they update it. That's why that ed goal being updated is very important. So if I was a counselor and I saw a student that was in an ed goal that limited their financial aid, I would have a conversation with them, and should they pick a different ed goal, then I would make that change right there in that moment in the system so it reflects the ed goal that will maximize their financial aid. So those are the system things that we have to have a conversation, but typically counselors are the ones that do informed ed goals, right? Like students come to the college with an uninformed goal, and after they meet a counselor, the idea is that they walk out with an informed ed goal. So that's why the ed goal piece is really important right now for some of these conversations with financial aid.
All right, I feel like someone should ask something because this is your opportunity, but if you're done, that's okay. I do want to say that I'm very grateful that when we put this together, it was a collaborative effort between the Faculty Association, the Academic Senate, Academic Affairs, and Student Support Services. And I think we're trying to show you that we really do want for all of us to work together. That's how we're going to get all of this done. So thank you to all the people that agreed to be on the panel. Thank you for your questions. We appreciate your time in coming out today. And this will be taped, so you can certainly watch it again. All right, well, thank you very much. Now have a good day, everybody.